power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it stands in silence while the other man crumbles from the inside. Machiavelli knew this. You don't defeat a person by shouting them down. You defeat them by making them question their own thoughts, their own memory, their own sanity. The most terrifying form of control isn't violence, it's confusion. Because when a man can't trust his own mind, he becomes easy to guide, easy to break, and easy to rule. You don't have to destroy your enemy. Just make him doubt what's real. You don't need to confront someone directly to defeat them. The most effective power is the kind that slips beneath the surface unnoticed, unchallenged, yet slowly rotting the foundation of their mind. Machiavelli would have smiled at the idea of subtle psychological warfare, because this is not about arguing, not about domination through volume or intimidation. It's about something far colder, more permanent. It's about corrosion. You don't need to swing a sword when you can poison the water. You begin not with attack, but with almost imperceptible nudges, questions that don't accuse, gestures that don't alarm, tone shifts that feel like nothing at first. You notice what they rely on, their confidence, their recall, their self-image, and you begin to chip at it quietly. You don't say they're wrong. You just ask if they're sure. You don't say they failed. You just raise your eyebrow when they call it a win. It's these micro movements that cause macro collapse, because the mind, once questioned, begins to fold in on itself. They'll revisit past conversations, second-guess their decisions, analyze your smallest glance like it holds a secret insult. And in that paranoia, you win. You haven't yelled. You haven't lied. You haven't even said anything unkind. But now, they flinch before they speak. They scan your face for meaning. They begin apologizing for things you never criticized. That is how power moves without touching. Most people believe control comes from charisma, dominance, leadership. But Machiavelli knew better. Real control comes from imbalance. From the ability to walk into a room and make people adjust their voice, their story, their confidence, without you ever needing to raise yours. And that imbalance begins with the mind. If you can insert a question into someone's certainty, they will answer it for the rest of their life. This is not manipulation for its own sake. This is how rulers are made. Not through cruelty, but through psychological architecture. You don't build castles, you build mirrors, mirrors that warp. And when they can't tell if it's you or them causing the distortion, they lose the ability to stand. That's when you speak. That's when you guide. That's when they follow. Not because you commanded them, but because you became the only thing in the room that still felt real. The smartest offense is the one that leaves no fingerprints, no direct blow, no words they can quote against you. Instead, you plant doubt like a seed, small, subtle, and easy to overlook. But once it takes root, it grows into something they cannot control. Machiavelli understood that the moment someone questions their own judgment, you no longer need to challenge it. They will do the damage for you. The art of invisible offense begins with observation. You watch what they're proud of. You study what they repeat. You learn what makes them feel secure. Then you target it not with insult, but with gentle ambiguity. A delayed pause, a strange look, a simple at the right moment. Say nothing directly, but force their mind to fill in the silence. If they brag about a win, don't argue, just nod too slowly. If they're certain about a decision, ask if they're sure, but with an expression that suggests you know something they don't. Humans cannot handle loose threads in their own reality. They pull at them until the whole sweater unravels. This is how you control without confrontation, by using the power of implication, and if done correctly, it never leads back to you. They start wondering if others think the same thing, if that meeting went as well as they thought, if that joke actually landed. You've said nothing. But now they're quiet, scanning reactions, losing certainty. And the beauty is, you can do this in public, in group settings, in passing. Let others witness the seed of doubt, and soon that doubt becomes communal. They'll receive less affirmation from others, because others follow your cues. They'll become defensive, even when no one is attacking. And defensiveness looks like guilt, like weakness, like proof. This is psychological warfare without battle. The moment you get them to explain themselves, to justify something that wasn't questioned aloud, you've already won. Because now they've exposed their own fear. They've shown you what matters to them. And they've admitted, without knowing it, that your opinion has weight. Invisible offense also thrives in inconsistency. Sometimes you affirm them. Sometimes you don't react. Sometimes you ignore completely. This unpredictability makes them crave clarity from you, which gives you even more control. You don't need to argue. You don't need to convince. You simply need to remain slightly unreadable. In a world addicted to validation, unreadability is power. Most people chase certainty. The Machiavellian reverses this. He strips certainty from others while appearing perfectly composed himself. That's the trick. Your balance becomes their instability, and the quieter you play it, the more they unravel. Not because you attacked, but because they can't find where the attack began. There is a darker way to win without ever throwing a punch. Make their victories feel hollow. Make them second guess the very things they should be proud of. Machiavelli understood that the easiest person to control is the one who doesn't trust his own success. You don't need to discredit someone's achievement loudly. You only need to shift the way they perceive it. When someone speaks of what they've accomplished, you nod, but not with admiration, with mild surprise, as if it didn't quite live up to the hype. You congratulate them, but your words come slowly, like you're trying to find the right compliment for something that doesn't deserve one. You let the silence after their story linger just a second too long, and suddenly the moment of celebration turns cold. The real tactic is this. You don't steal their victory, you redefine it. If they close a deal, you call it a good starting point. If they win a debate, you call it a lucky moment. If they get attention, you say, yeah, but you know how easily people are impressed these days. You let them speak while you adjust the frame around their words. Not with insult, but with indifference. Indifference is the scalpel. It slices deeper than criticism, because people crave validation far more than they admit. And when it doesn't come or comes wrapped in faint praise, they begin to wonder what they're missing. This method doesn't create enemies. It creates uncertainty. And uncertainty is a leash. Now they want your approval. Now they watch your face for signs of approval they used to get from the crowd. That's when you own them. Because when someone is proud and unshaken, they are dangerous. But when they feel their high point wasn't really high, when they feel their achievement might have been mediocre, dressed in applause, they become insecure. And insecurity makes them predictable. Machiavellian control is not about tearing down openly. It's about draining the power out of what someone thought made them strong. A title, a moment, a compliment. You let them shine, then lower the lights. This is how kings are made from the shadows. You never challenged the win, you just made it smaller, less stable, less permanent. And once they feel that their best moments are still lacking in your eyes, they begin performing for your silent approval. You become the standard they measure against, and they don't even know when that started. That's the point. Real psychological warfare doesn't feel like war. It feels like doubt, a quiet storm that whispers, maybe you're not as strong as you think. Quote, praise is supposed to heal, but in the hands of a strategist, it becomes a scalpel, precise, silent, and just sharp enough to cut without leaving a visible wound. Machiavelli would have called this conflicted praise, the art of complimenting your target in a way that unsettles rather than empowers. You don't withhold admiration. You offer it, but with a twist, a pause, a question mark instead of a period, and most importantly, a tone that lingers in the space between sincerity and suggestion. You actually did pretty well, all things considered. That word actually isn't accidental. It introduces the idea that expectations were low, that failure was assumed. You really pulled it off this time. Implies they usually don't. That was surprisingly impressive, is a ribbon wrapped around a grenade. You're not insulting. You're not even criticizing. But what you're doing is far worse. You're rewriting their internal narrative. Instead of feeling certain, they begin to replay the moment. Was that a genuine win? Did I truly do well? Or was that just luck? Am I being praised or tolerated? That loop becomes endless. And once someone starts searching for clarity, they start giving you power. Because now your silence matters more than their success. They lean into you. They wait for your reaction, and that waiting turns into a kind of leash. The genius of conflicted praise is that it poisons without being rejected. People want to believe the praise, so they accept it, but the contradiction inside makes it haunt them. It's like offering someone a drink that tastes sweet but burns the throat. They sip, smile, then wonder what's wrong with them. That's how you destabilize with charm. When done publicly, the effect is even stronger. The crowd hears the compliment, but the subject hears the imbalance. And now they have to smile while privately decoding your tone. The more they act unaffected, the more affected they actually are. This is how perception becomes a weapon. You make someone doubt how others see them, not with accusation, but with applause. Controlled applause. Applause that sounds a little too thoughtful, a little too slow. And now they are unsure not only of their performance, but of the entire room. Machiavelli never taught you to scream. He taught you to whisper things people would repeat inside their own heads. Conflicted praise is a whisper dressed in gold. It sounds like a gift, but it's a test, a mirror, a riddle, and the longer they stare into it, the more they forget what they looked like before they met you. That's the beginning of psychological capture, not by dominance, but by suggestion so subtle they think it came from their own mind. The most fragile minds are the ones trapped in rooms that only echo their own voice. Surrounded by people who nod, flatter, and agree, they mistake approval for accuracy. They believe applause means truth. This is their weakness, and this is where the collapse begins. Machiavelli understood that you don't always need to attack someone head-on. Sometimes, all you need to do is slip one discordant note into the music and let the rest unravel. One hesitation, one sideways glance, one innocent question that doesn't fit the chorus. The echo chamber thrives on repetition. Everyone around the target says the same things, gives the same feedback, reinforces the same illusions. So when you say nothing or say something that doesn't quite align, it doesn't create a debate. It creates dissonance, quiet but sharp. At first, they may dismiss you, shrug it off, but the seed is planted. You have introduced contradiction into their safety zone. And now They're listening harder to everyone else, searching for confirmation that they're still right, still strong, still above. The trap is simple. Make them realize their reality is dependent on affirmation, that their confidence is not self-generated, it's borrowed. And once they see that, they start to panic, because the applause might not come next time, the smile might be forced, the loyalty might be fake. You didn't have to expose them. They exposed themselves the moment they noticed. Not everyone clapped. That's the collapse. Not immediate, not dramatic, but slow and psychological. Their certainty begins to crack, their instincts dull, and worst of all, their performance changes. They act differently, trying harder to regain the echo they lost. And that effort shows. People can smell desperation in posture, tone, and breath. Others in the room notice the shift, and slowly, the applause changes pitch. What used to be a standing ovation becomes scattered claps. Fewer laughs, shorter answers, and now they don't just doubt you, they doubt everyone. That's when the paranoia starts. That's when they start rehearsing every conversation, playing detective in social rooms that used to feel safe. And the more they rehearse, the more they lose the natural confidence that got them attention in the first place. All because you said one thing, maybe even said nothing, and watched them question their kingdom. The genius of psychological warfare is not that you make someone fail, it's that you make them undo their own success. You showed them the echo, then you showed them it could vanish. And once they realize that, they can't unhear the silence. That silence becomes your power. Your presence becomes the mirror they fear. Because now, every time you walk into the room, they don't hear applause. They hear doubt. You don't need to control a person to control their mind. You only need to control the room they're standing in. Machiavelli understood that most people don't think, they absorb. They read the cues, copy the posture, listen for tone. Their confidence is environmental. Put them in the right room and they feel powerful. Change the temperature of that room just slightly and they begin to shrink. That's the subtle art of dominance, not by argument, but by atmosphere. You control the chairs, the lighting, the silence. You control who they must impress and who is watching. You don't raise your voice, you raise the pressure. This is why rulers build palaces, high ceilings, gold trim, echoing floors, not just to show wealth, but to remind visitors they are small. When someone walks into your space and it feels unfamiliar, unbalanced, uncertain, you already own the frame. And when you own the frame, you own their mind. You can do this without luxury. A simple office, a room where you choose the seat they take, the distance between you, the order of who enters first. Every inch of control you exert over the surroundings is one less inch of freedom they feel internally. Why does this work? Because people crave structure, but fear being out of place within it. When you control the structure, they instinctively try to adapt to it. That adaptation is obedience in disguise. Change the environment, and the mind follows. A confident man in a crowd becomes a stranger in silence. A loud critic in private becomes quiet when the room holds no witnesses. They don't know what's shifted, only that their certainty is no longer welcome. That confusion is leverage. You make them wait longer than usual. Offer a seat that's slightly lower. Delay the start of the conversation. Introduce a third party who stays quiet, just watching. These small manipulations don't register as attacks, but they begin to cloud the target's instinct. They question why they're uneasy, why their voice sounds different, why they can't find their rhythm. They may never realize it's because you restructured the space. And that's the beauty of it. You never had to argue. You never had to confront. You just redefined the setting. and their behavior rewrote itself. That is the essence of subtle psychological warfare. Not to shout someone down, but to turn the room against their certainty. By the time they adjust, they've already lost ground, and you calm, composed, immovable, remain the only fixed point they can't predict. That's control, not over what they say, but over how they feel the moment they say it. A smile is supposed to be safe, warm, inviting, but in the hands of a tactician, it becomes something else entirely unreadable, unsettling, and more dangerous than any scowl. Machiavelli would have told you, never underestimate the confusion of a smile that arrives in the wrong moment. Most people expect emotions to match situations, anger when challenged, sadness when criticized, laughter when praised. But when you smile genuinely, or not, at unexpected times, it severs their ability to interpret the room. It introduces a glitch into their emotional logic. They expect you to react. Instead, you smile. And that alone forces them to question whether what they just said had any effect at all, or worse, whether you know something they don't. That's when their certainty begins to rot. A calm smile during conflict says, "You're not dangerous to me." A polite grin when insulted says, "This was expected." A soft smirk while being corrected says, "You think you're in control, but you're not." The smile becomes a weapon because it is a contradiction, and the human brain is allergic to contradiction. It wants clean outcomes, fear after threat, shame after failure, pride after victory. But when your expression doesn't match the script, when you inject serenity where tension belongs, they begin to question the script itself. They no longer know who's losing, or who's in control, or whether you're even playing the same game. That ambiguity unmoors them. They search for footing, for clues, for validation that their attack landed. But you've given them nothing, just a smile. And now the silence around that smile becomes a maze. Every second they try to interpret your expression, you grow larger in their mind. The smile becomes symbolic. It carries weight. It becomes memory. And they will carry it with them long after the conversation ends. Because it didn't close anything, it opened something: doubt, confusion, curiosity. That's how you win without speaking. You become the question they keep replaying. Not because you shouted, not because you overpowered, but because you smiled when they expected surrender. And that one moment made them feel like they missed something. Like they were outplayed and didn't even realize it until it was too late. Most people weaponize words. The wise weaponize reaction. But the dangerous? They weaponize restraint. A smile held too long, too still, too calm. That smile becomes a mirror, and the longer they stare into it, the more they see their own insecurity staring back. You didn't need to insult them. You let them expose themselves. And when they think of you, they won't remember what you said. They'll remember how your silence smiled back at their storm and made it rain harder. Some wounds don't come from what was said, but from what was never said, and still remembered. That is the art of psychological warfare, not to fight the mind directly, but to haunt it. Machiavelli understood this before modern psychology had a name for it. People believe memory is about truth, but memory is emotion sculpted into narrative. And the most powerful manipulator doesn't argue facts, they implant experiences. You don't need to prove someone wrong. You only need to make them remember something they can't fully explain. A look, a pause, a moment of uncertainty that stains the entire encounter. Later, when they replay it, and they will, they won't recall exactly what happened. They'll recall how it felt, and that feeling, left unaddressed, becomes memory. That is your advantage. Because a person who trusts their feelings more than facts will always rewrite the story to make sense of the discomfort you've planted. They will revise history to explain the silence. They will reinterpret your expression. They will begin to imagine implications you never said aloud. And in doing so, they will slowly convince themselves that you knew something they didn't, that maybe they exposed something, that maybe you saw it. And now that memory isn't just an encounter, it's a threat, and it grows stronger each time they revisit it. You didn't attack them, you didn't accuse them, but the moment you broke eye contact after their comment, tilted your head slightly, smiled for half a second, and said, you made them feel watched. That moment gets filed away, not because it was loud, but because it left a scar without drawing blood. That's how implanted memory works. It's not about what they can quote, it's about what they can't forget. The vague unease, the lingering suspicion, the need to justify a moment that didn't make sense. And now, every time they see you, that memory gets triggered again. It becomes a phantom weight they carry in your presence. They'll try to act normal, pretend it's forgotten. But their performance will be too polished, their smile too fast, their speech a little too careful. Because they are trying to avoid another moment like that one. That is control, not by force, but by psychological footprint. You left nothing behind, and yet they can't stop cleaning up after you. Most men aim to dominate in the moment. The smarter ones haunt in the aftermath. And the truly powerful, they implant memories so subtly that the target will swear it was their thought all along. That is the trick. You don't need to tell them what to believe. You only need to give them the right silence to believe it themselves. The most effective manipulation is not to force someone to break their principles, but to make them redefine them. A man who believes he's moral will fight harder to protect his choices if he believes those choices are still good. This is where real control lives. Not in punishment, not in reward, but in erosion. Subtle, almost invisible erosion of clarity. Machiavelli understood that most people are not governed by virtue, they're governed by self-perception. They don't act morally because it's hard-coded. They act morally because they like thinking of themselves as moral. That image is fragile, and you can corrupt it not by open confrontation, but by gentle encouragement. All you have to do is praise the small, grey choices. That was clever. I see why you did that. You're just playing the game, and suddenly bending a rule doesn't feel wrong. It feels intelligent, necessary, expected. You didn't tell them to lie. You told them they were smart for how they handled the truth. You didn't ask them to betray. You simply noticed how quickly they adapted. Every time you offer admiration for their compromise, their compass shifts 1 degree at a time. And because you never condemned their original values, they believe those values still exist, but they don't. Not really. They've been softened, stretched, blurred, until the lines between principle and preference are too faint to follow. This is the slow death of certainty. And once you control a person's certainty, you control everything. They'll start rationalizing their own shifts. They'll say, "This isn't who I am," while continuing the pattern. They'll say, "It's just this one time," again and again. And when they look up, they'll realize they've become someone else on your watch, but never by your command. That's the trick. You didn't give orders. You gave approval, and they did the rest. The blurring of the moral compass is the long game. It doesn't win arguments, it ends the need for them. Because a person who no longer knows exactly what they believe will bend to whoever sounds most certain. And if you've stayed calm, focused, and emotionally distant, you will sound like that voice. Not their guilt, not their instinct. You. People think corruption is loud, but it's quiet. A whisper instead of a warning. A nod instead of a line in the sand. The more you reward compromise, the more they will call it survival. And one day, they will do your will and call it their own decision. That is not influence. That is authorship. And the story they're telling themselves, you wrote it, line by line. The most dangerous place for the mind to live is in a loop with no resolution. That's what the doubt spiral is, a psychological vortex where certainty corrodes and the target becomes their own tormentor. Machiavelli would have admired its elegance. No need to strike, no need to persuade, only to create just enough uncertainty to make them pull themselves apart. The first seed is always small. A subtle pause, a curious glance, a question you don't finish. Are you sure about that? Said just once and never explained. The power is not in the suggestion, it's in the echo that follows. They begin to hear that question in silence, in reflection, in every decision that follows. It loops. The brain wants resolution, so it replays the moment again and again. But there is no answer, because you gave none. And in that void, their confidence starts to decay. The spiral begins. They question their memory, then their logic, then their instincts. They start asking others for reassurance, but the more they ask, the weaker they feel. Eventually, they begin apologizing for things they aren't even sure they did wrong. That's how deep the spiral goes. It replaces strength with self-surveillance. And once that's in place, you don't need to say another word. They will regulate themselves to avoid disappointing you. They will hesitate before speaking. They will shrink themselves without knowing why. Doubt becomes obedience, but not the kind you demand, the kind they offer in exchange for peace of mind. But there is no peace, only quiet control. That's the genius of the doubt spiral. It doesn't destroy, it rewrites. A confident person becomes hesitant. An honest man starts watching his own mouth. A proud woman begins to ask if she's too much. You never forced a change. You only lit the match. Their mind did the rest. Because the doubt spiral isn't fear of you, it's fear of not understanding you. And in a world where everyone is desperate to feel certain, your mystery becomes dominance. But here's the cruelty. The deeper they fall, the more loyal they become. Not because they trust you, but because they need your reactions to feel stable again. They look for your nod, your silence, your approval. They stop trusting themselves. And once that happens, you are no longer dealing with a rival, you are shaping a dependent. They can't escape, because you never caged them. They lock themselves in with a question they can't stop asking. What did they really mean? And as long as you never answer, they will never leave. Once doubt takes root, it grows inwards. But the strategist doesn't stop at corrosion, they convert it into leverage. Machiavelli would not have simply unsettled his enemies. He would have turned that unease into loyalty. Not the kind born of respect, but of need. Doubt alone weakens people, but doubt without relief makes them seek a new anchor. And when they lose trust in their own judgment, you offer the only clarity left. This is how doubt becomes dependence. It begins with small corrections, a suggestion phrased as a favor. You don't tell them what to do, you imply it. They ask, "Do you think I handled that right?" And you answer slowly, "I would have done it differently, but that's just me." That hesitation they already had, now it feels confirmed. You've reinforced their self-doubt without ever raising your voice. And they lean in closer. Next time, they ask before acting. They want your read on things. They mimic your approach, your tone, your posture in conflict. They are no longer operating from self-direction. They are waiting to be calibrated. and you calmly provide it. Not every time. That's the key. Give feedback unpredictably. Approve one thing, ignore the next. They will begin chasing your response, desperate for the approval that once came freely from within. This dependency is quiet at first. It looks like admiration. Then it evolves into reliance. They lose their taste for risk, unless they're sure you'll applaud the outcome. They think through your eyes. They explain their decisions with your language. They stop acting unless they've imagined your judgment in advance. And all of this happens without pressure, only precision. The ultimate Machiavellian victory isn't domination through force. It's seduction through ambiguity. You become the axis of their self-worth, and you never asked for it. That's why it lasts. Because it feels like their choice, but underneath that illusion is your structure. Doubt was the entry point. Now they sit within a mental architecture you designed. They look strong, but every movement is a question. Would you have done it like this? You've become the unseen advisor in their internal court, and the beauty is you don't have to say a word. Your silence has weight. Your nod is law. Your absence, unbearable. That is the power of turning doubt into dependence. It makes obedience feel like survival. And as long as they keep reaching for your signal, they will never realize how far they've drifted from themselves. You don't own them, but they would not know who they are without you. And that is far more permanent. Confusion is powerful. But what breaks people isn't chaos, it's contrast. When you spend enough time in silence, ambiguity, and veiled meanings, a single moment of sharp, precise clarity can feel like lightning. Controlled clarity is not constant. It is rare. It is deliberate. And it is terrifying. Machiavelli understood that to rule minds, you don't always obscure, you reveal, but only when it hurts. Imagine you've spent days or weeks being unreadable. You've offered nothing but mild nods, unreadable gazes, soft shrugs. The person across from you has filled in all the blanks themselves. They've rewritten their memories, questioned their instincts, rearranged their logic just to find footing near you. And then, at the exact moment when they need reassurance, you give them the opposite. Not with cruelty, but with precision. A single sentence, sharp and cold. You're not who you think you are. That clarity slices deeper than any insult. Because it doesn't just correct, it exposes. They've been trying to earn your approval. And suddenly, you show them they've failed. But more than that, you reveal you saw everything. Their overcompensation, their weakness, their need. Controlled clarity is the scalpel. And the wound it opens bleeds trust. Not just in you, but in themselves. That is the true aim. It is not about being cruel for cruelty's sake. It is about timing. Clarity offered too early builds resistance too often, and you become predictable. But when clarity comes after doubt has softened the mind, it becomes law. They will remember what you said forever, not because it was loud, but because it confirmed their secret fear. And the only relief from that fear is your silence again. So they will cling to it. They will beg for more confusion if it means avoiding another flash of truth. They will trade their independence for your mystery. Because in a world where you can strike with a single word, every silence begins to feel safer than the truth. That is the paradox. You weaponize clarity, not by speaking often, but by holding it hostage. They never know when you'll break the fog, when you'll tell them exactly what they are. And that uncertainty keeps them humble, desperate, and loyal. When you master controlled clarity, you don't just command the room, you haunt it. Because everyone knows when you finally speak, it will not be noise. It will be final. and they will spend their lives trying to avoid the next sentence. Wounds heal, but doubt does not. That's what makes it the perfect weapon. It doesn't need to bleed. It doesn't even need to hurt at first. It just needs to linger. A single moment of uncertainty, planted deep enough, becomes a lifelong question mark. Machiavelli didn't need armies to win. He needed hesitation in his enemies, because hesitation means delay. Delay means missed opportunities, and missed opportunities mean power slowly slips from one hand into another yours. Doubt, when properly placed, becomes a scar, not because it is visible, but because it changes how a person moves forever. They walk slower, they think longer, they speak more carefully, they lead less, they hesitate, and every hesitation is your fingerprint. People don't realize when they've been permanently changed. They'll say they're just being cautious or thinking more deeply. But what they're really doing is seeking your permission without even knowing it. They no longer trust their gut. They second guess their instincts. And long after you've left the room, long after your name has faded from conversation, they are still living in your frame. This is why the most powerful Machiavellian move is not revenge, not confrontation, not even silence. It is the scar you leave behind in someone's decision-making process, because that scar will reopen in every critical moment, in every chance they have to rise, in every confrontation they might have won until they pull back, just enough to lose. You do not need to defeat them. You simply need them to defeat themselves slowly. Doubt makes that possible, because it is not active. It is passive erosion. And the genius of it is that it masquerades as wisdom. They'll call it growth, but in truth, it's fear. Fear of being wrong. Fear of being seen. Fear of not measuring up to the version of themselves that once acted freely before you entered the frame. Doubt becomes their new baseline. And you walk clean. You never raised your voice. You never humiliated them. You never needed to, because they'll never stop trying to reclaim the confidence they lost around you, and they'll never find it. Because confidence built on your approval is a mirage one, they'll chase forever. That's why the scar remains. Not to hurt them, but to haunt them. Doubt turns enemies into ghosts of themselves, and the world never notices, but you will. Because deep down, you'll know, they didn't lose to you in battle, they lost to themselves in silence, and they never came back. Like this video, subscribe to Dark Blue Psychology, turn on notifications, and keep walking the path of cold clarity. The mind is your battlefield, and this is only the beginning. Watch the next strategy now.